All right, our next speaker is also from the UK, Mark Lemon. All right. All right. Okay, so just to introduce Mark. Mark is a senior semiotician at Science Salad in London. He has a master's degree in semiotics from Tartu in Estonia. His paper is entitled Packing and Meaning, Applying Jakobson's Model of Communication to Pack Design.
Okay, morning. Don't worry, we're nearly at the coffee break. I'll try not to exercise your brains too much, but there will be a little bit of theory at the start of this paper, but don't worry, hopefully it gets to the kind of applications towards the end with something that you can really all grab hold of. So, packing and meaning, applying Jakobson's model of communication to pack design. Roman Jakobson was a Russian-American linguist, very important in the fields of structuralism, translation, and literary theory, and he came up with this model of communication that you can see depicted in the center of the screen there. Unfortunately, we're slightly losing the top, but I'll do my best to kind of explain that as we go through. But as I said, he was primarily a linguist, and he had this model of communication. The aim of this paper is to see if we can transport or liberate this model from the realm of linguistics, the focus on the written and the spoken word, into the realm of semiotics in general, so this much more multi-sensory context. And there's good reason to believe that this might be possible. Jakobson himself says that many devices studied by Poetics, part of his interests, are not confined to the verbal art, but actually present in other areas. This is the model of communication that we're going to be discussing throughout this, so it's very important that we can all see it. And he breaks down, Roman Jakobson breaks down an instance of communication into 6 constituent parts. You have your addresser, or the sender. We have our addressee, the receiver of the message. We have the context, which is the kind of world that surrounds the two people in dialogue. This relates very strongly to that concept of Umwelt that Marcel mentioned earlier, the meaningful world of the people discussing. Then we have contact, which in the case of spoken communication is the auditory channel. And we have the code, which again, in the case of communication now would be the code of the English language, the rules that govern which sounds I can put together in which order. So this is the linguistic model. Now, for each of these factors in communication, he identifies an attendant function, which sort of colors the meaning of the overall discussion. These functions are invoked when an utterance points towards one of these individual factors. So what do I mean by this? Well, hopefully on this chart we can see some examples. This first one here, this statement here, I'm enjoying the weather, that I'm really puts the focus back onto the addresser. This is the emotive function. It informs the world about the addresser's opinions, about their worldview, about their understanding of the current situation. This is the emotive function. The next statement is a very similar statement, but subtly different, because this is just, isn't the weather nice today? The context here, the addresser has been somewhat removed or placed lower in the order of functions here, and the focus here is on the context. So this is the referential function. We have the focus on the message itself through the poetic function, so the sizzling summer sunshine. The use of sibilants here emphasizes the materiality of the message itself. We have the conative function that's invoked when you directly kind of point to the addressee. So you should wear a hat is the conative function. That use of the you is really directing the message. We have contact, which opens up this auditory channel. So for example, with hey, I call out to someone across the street, take a brolly, it's raining. The hey there is opening up this auditory channel. And then we have the metalingual function, which focuses on the code. So they might respond, oh, it's more of a drizzle. They're questioning and refining my use of language, making sure that we use the same code, we understand it in the same way. So this is the metalingual function. Now, it's very important to consider that these functions don't operate on their own. In any utterance, there are probably several going on at once. It's almost a bit like a game of snakes and ladders, where as a dialogue continues, the various functions will kind of shuffle up and down in a very malleable, movable hierarchy. And this hierarchy will be present throughout the kind of discussion and constantly changing. So that was a kind of very technical look at the linguistic model, but what can we do with this model? How can we transport this into the multi-sensory world of commercial semiotics? Let's imagine a communication situation that's kind of at the background of many commercial semiotic problems, specifically around pack design. We have a product kind of on a shelf in a store, existing inside a pack, and we have the consumer in the store environment. How are each of these communication factors manifest in this space? So the context here is really the shop environment most immediately, but is also kind of broadly the sort of capitalist commercial culture that surrounds the product in question. The addressor here is the brand or the product, depending slightly on the exact situation. The addressee is the consumer receiving the information from the pack. Contact here is primarily the visual channel, but as Matthew went into, there are a number of other senses that can also be invoked in this space. The code is the visual and linguistic conventions that are in play, and the message is the pack itself. So, how would each of Jakobson's communication functions be effectively realized in a pack design? Let's look first at the emotive function, the focus on the addressor. So for Roman Jakobson, this applies to any utterance that draws the attention back to the opinions, the emotions, the worldview of the addressor. So it could be expressions such as wow or phew. And this tends to produce an impression of a certain emotion, whether true or feigned. On a pack, any kind of instances of these kind of long descriptive texts of the brand's history, any statements about the quality of their product, and also imagery of brand founders, all start to tell you something about the ideology and emotional perspective of the brand in question. So for instance, the famous Carlsberg statement there, probably the best beer in the world, communicates to us something about their optimism and a degree of kind of irreverence. The Jack Daniels statement, every day we make it, we'll make it the best we can. At the foot of that is that there's a sense of kind of duty to a kind of tradition embedded in their pack design there, with the founding figure at the top there overseeing this. The next function is the referential function, this pointing to context. So how this is all about kind of pointing words, if you like. So that or there, identifying individual objects kind of in the world surrounding you linguistically. But in the pack design, this is in reference to this kind of commercial space, if you will. So any kind of on-pack factors that draw attention to the kind of the price, the excellent value of the product, the additional volume, the sort of buy one, get one free wording, all of these foreground the commercial context in which the pack exists. These really code products that really exist to be purchased and make this moment of purchase their primary function. In terms of the message, we have the poetic function. So linguistically, this is all about, as Jakobson says, promoting the palpability of the signs, so through rhyme, through rhythm, through sibilance, through assonance, etc. And we see this very often used in rhyming slogans, in nonsense verse, or with kind of puns. How can we do this on a pack, though? How can a pack be about itself, make us realize its own palpability, its own material nature? So this happens through packs that are designed to resemble other objects, such as the Hendrick's Gin kind of apothecary-style bottle, or through multiple textures on the pack, additional layers of packaging, elaborate folds, unusual opening mechanisms, all of which draw attention to the fact that the pack itself is a materially crafted object. The pack itself becomes more palpable for all of these factors and provides this textured, multi-sensory experience. The next function is the Phatic function. So for Jakobson, as we know, in language, this is the calling out, hey, or if you're in conversation with someone, the moments of kind of and kind of nodding your head to show that you're still listening, to maintain and keep that channel open. So how do we do this for a pack? Well, as discussed, packs are primarily communicate through the visual channel. So any kind of distinctive visual elements, whether it's bright neon colors, whether it's the use of glitter, all of these things open up the channel between consumer and brand. We can also think of noise-making elements. You know, the popping of a bottle of champagne may be kind of incidental and a factor of the product, but as soon as you hear that pop, it draws your attention. It brings you into a communication situation, and it tells you who to go and approach with your empty glass, most importantly. The next one is the metalingual function. So for Jakobson, this is used when checking the code, checking the language that's being used. So do you know what I mean? Or for semioticians, we're very familiar with the question, what is semiotics? It's kind of a burden in all of our lives. So we're very familiar with the metalingual function. But on a pack, this is actually more appropriately kind of an intersemiotic function. You're dealing with more than one sign system here, not just the verbal language. So this intersemiotic context is kind of invoked where you have diagrams describing how to open the pack or how to use the product inside. We have words commenting about images and images commenting about words, vice versa, this intersemiotic interaction that reinforces the meaning of the image and the word simultaneously. And then the final function we're going to look at is the conative function. So for Jakobson, this is when the addressee is directly targeted. And it's to sort of encourage some sort of change in behavior in the addressee. So don't go out without a coat, or Mike, don't go out without a coat. You want to inflict some kind of change or cause some kind of change in their behavior, in their worldview. How is this done on a pack? So sometimes it's very simply with the kind of literal use of you on the pack. You need to do this, you need to do that. You'll regret this. Guinness is good for you. This bud's for you. All of these things call the addressee towards a kind of moment of consumption. And this codes products that have this potent transformative effect in the lives of consumers. This can also be represented somewhat metaphorically with kind of before and after consumption images showing you the great transformation that will go through, undergo when consuming the product. So, I've just kind of dumped on you quite a lot of kind of theory stuff there, which I appreciate is kind of hard to take in, but this becomes more concrete and interesting when we push it a little bit further and we start to look at some concrete uses of this. So, we can start to break down and look at certain categories in terms of the different hierarchies of functions that those categories favor. So, for instance, supermarkets favor quite strongly often the referential function. Fragrances make use of the poetic function, communicating to you the artistry and creativity that's been involved in the creation of the product itself, despite the fact that you can't smell it through the packaging. The emotive function is frequently used by charities, by causes, to kind of make you feel something and prompt you to donate. Conative is often about self-improvement. The Phatic is usually kind of energy drinks, party drinks, those sort of things. And metalingual is frequently with power tools. You know, it routes, it sands, and then it shows you an image of it doing each of those things in case you're not sure what routing is, for instance. Additionally, we can start to then look at categories over a kind of time span, over their evolution. So can we also consider the residual, dominant, and emergent category narratives by their favored functions? So for instance here, in the confectionery category, we can see that dominantly there's a lot of use of the Phatic function, these brightly colored packs calling out attention to kind of younger consumers or to potential impulse buyers, making them know that this option is available to them by the tills. But emergently, there's much more a context of the emotive function being introduced here, some kind of personal investment in that product, telling you that it's not just full of sugar and colors and e-numbers, but it's also full of this deep-rooted emotional love. And then the other thing we can kind of do is we can start to look at different genres of film, of music, and break these down by the various functions that they invoke. So jazz music perhaps is about the poetic function, the sort of use of kind of dissonance and harmony mixed up in various interesting ways, emphasizes that textuality of the music. Club music and the way in which there is a contrast between the high notes and the low notes is the kind of Phatic function, making you aware of its own existence. So, in conclusion, we can see, hopefully, that Jakobson's model of communication presents a model that can be useful, potentially, for commercial semioticians, to analyze packaging, and also to build meaning across category and cultural boundaries. Considering Jakobson's communication functions can help with the development of novel packaging solutions for various client problems. And additionally, if we take this model out into broad culture, we can start to reveal the inherent communication biases present in various genres, various categories, and cultural spaces. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Mark. That was fantastic. And since I'm actually just bidding on a package design project, it's very interesting as well, inspirational. We're just going to open up the floor to questions before we go into the break. So I'm just going to stay here and then go ahead.
Thank you, Mark. Really interesting as ever. A question. It strikes me, revisiting that Jakobson model now, that in some ways it's an expression of an Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment kind of culture where emotion very much knew its place as, 1 in 6 and possibly a slightly minor touchy-feely part of the repertoire. Whereas now we're looking at, post-Damasio and brands understanding the power, the importance of the emotional benefit, experiential branding, etc., where emotion has been ramped right up. Does that imply any tweaks that, in practice, when you're moving from the model to strategic recommendations that you're kind of bringing into play?
Yes, I think it would. I think it's this whole question is very interesting in light of yesterday's workshop as well, the kind of embodied elements, because as we can see from the model, to some extent, any pack calls attention to itself and to the brand. So there's some kind of emotional thing kind of already going on there, pointing back towards the branding question. But we can see the ways in which we can nuance that to express more directly certain emotions by aligning that kind of fact with various of the other functions. So I think it's always important to realize, unfortunately, the nature of this presentation, I kind of had to focus on them slightly individually, but that these things are always working together, kind of in concert and collaborating with each other. But kind of considering and looking at the different spaces in which a brand operates, and looking at how to invoke that emotional experience is obviously a very important consideration nowadays, and something that we as semioticians and our ability to access this kind of embodied experience of the world, we really need to be pushing that as a kind of strong statement of our value to the clients. It's something that we can access in a way that many other methodologies will struggle to do.
Thank you, Mark. I found the presentation very interesting in the way of applying the Jakobson model. You have chosen, when you are on the referential function, the context, you have chosen to show especially the rebate, the commercial surrounding, and the supermarket environment. But where would you put the product experience itself? Because on the packaging itself, they also try to speak about what's inside the bottle, what you're going to experience, what's going to be the taste, and so on. So this type of message, content, or where do you put it in the functions? Which part?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is part of the referential function, certainly. I would definitely agree with that. I think it's maybe, in this instance, I was looking just at packs, but I think especially once you get into comms communications and you're kind of outside of the store, outside of that, you're depicting something in an in-home environment, then I think straight away that comes through very, very strongly. And that is, as Jakobson says, the referential function is the kind of key function for large amounts of linguistic communication. But I think as soon as you get to comms and advertising, it's the key function for most of that as well, really showing how this can be integrated into your life in that strong sense. So it certainly does occur on packs, but perhaps it's slightly limited by the medium in a way. And the most immediate context is that kind of store environment. But it's there to some extent, but yeah, when you get to comms, it really kind of expands out, and there's a lot of potential to really explore that more meaningfully. Yes, yes, certainly. Certainly, online shopping is more and more of a consideration for brands in general. So, yes, I think we can't ignore that, and I wouldn't wish to ignore that. These functions, I guess, the way I've explored them is very much realized in that physical sense. So these would need some more consideration, some more translation for that space. But you can see, obviously, phatic communication coming through with kind of with adverts that move or pop up. Most obviously, perhaps it's an annoying phenomenon, but it does make you aware of the brands in question. Similarly, can you go into the kind of documentary style supporting footage about the brand history, about the brand founders, as a way of accessing that emotional kind of context? So there are various ways in which these functions can all be translated into that digital space. It's just a matter of kind of considering how to do that, how to apply them. Yeah.